Sorry. Okay, this is CBC for Christmas Day. And I'm just curious, about what happens today. Although I think I can predict. You're going to see a lot about COVID and Omicron, and they're not going to mention that it's not as deadly or that we've already got all kinds of good therapeutics that we can use, or that everybody's already been double dosed already, and that there's no way that you can actually prevent yourself from getting it. And it's probably the best thing that ever happened in the history of the pandemic so far. Viruses usually become less deadly and more contagious. That way they get to spread around more. And so you don't need to panic, and etc. Okay, but I'm not going to play the sound today. So I'm going to do it a little bit differently. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this, and I haven't watched this yet, but I'm going to play it, and I'm going to read a little something from Wikipedia. Come on. In case you need to know my birthday. Okay, so no sound. Here we go. And I'm going to read something from you about the title of the article is Suffragette Bombing and Arson Campaign. So this is the women who were fighting for feminism right in the very beginning in England. And they had an organization called the Women's Social and Political Union, the WSPU. Okay, so, sorry. Okay, so here's the CBC, and laid on top of that, I'm going to do a little reading. Hopefully, can get somewhere in the next 13 minutes.
Good evening, I'm Anita Bass. Ian Hannamansing is away. Tonight, Ontario shatters COVID case records amid delays for testing and vaccines.
I didn't watch this.
But I just wanted to make sure that I could get something faster as things are getting.
Okay, the volume control doesn't work.
Hitting all-time highs and the implications for you.
So I'll just move it a little way further away. Okay, so there's that. Okay, so here we go. After decades of peaceful protests, the WSPO, which is the Women's Social and Political Union, believed that more radical action was needed to get the government to listen to the campaign for women's rights. From 1905, the WSPU's activities became increasingly militant, and its members became increasingly willing to break the law, inflicting damage upon property and people. WSPU supporters raided Parliament, physically assaulted politicians, and smashed windows at government premises. In one instance, the suffragette assaulted future Prime Minister Winston Churchill with a horsewhip. So one of these early bitches took a horsewhip to the future Prime Minister Winston Churchill. By God, I think that they've given us the wrong impression about these people. Okay, Okay, before 1911, the WSPUs made only sporadic use of violence, and it was directed almost exclusively at the government and its civil servants. Okay, Emily Davison, the suffragette who later became infamous after she was killed by the King's Horse at the 19th Epsom Derby, had launched several sole attacks in London 1911, but these attacks were uncommon at the time. On the 8th of December, Davison attempted to set fire to the busy post office. Tried to set fire to the busy post office of Fleet Street by placing a burning cloth soaked in kerosene and contained in an envelope into the building, but the intended fire did not hold. 6 days later, Davison set fire to 2 pillar boxes in the City of London before again attempting to set fire to the post office in Parliament Street, but she was arrested during the act and imprisoned. Okay, here's where it gets really good. I got 10 minutes. After 1911, suffragette violence was directed increasingly at commercial concerns and then at the general public. This violence was encouraged by the leadership of WSPU. Does this ring any bells? Holy shit. In particular, the daughters of WSPU leader, somebody there, took an active role in planning a self-described reign of terror. Emily Pankhurst stated that the aim of the campaign was to make England and every department of life insecure and unsafe. What in actual fuck? They were literal terrorists. Okay, so the start of the campaign, there's a canister of gunpowder was left close to the stage, and petrol and lit matches were thrown into the production booth at some movie theater that contained highly combustible film reels. These were fucking terrorists. Earlier in the day, Mary Lee had hurled a hatchet towards Asquith, which narrowly missed him and instead cut the Irish MP John Redmond in the ear. Arson attacks continued for the rest of 1912. On October, Hugh set fire to his train carriage as it pulled into Harrow Station. Okay, that's a male feminist. Always the craziest. On the 28th of November, post boxes were booby-trapped across Great Britain. What in actual hell? Starting a 5-day-long pillar box sabotage campaign with dangerous chemicals being poured into some boxes. In London, meanwhile, many letters were ignited while in transit at post offices, and paraffin and lit matches were also put into pillar boxes. On November 29th, a bystander was assaulted with a whip at Aberdeen railway station by Emily Davison, as she believed the man was politician David Lloyd George in disguise. Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah. They get around to talking about how it's not as deadly anymore. Okay, so eventually even the SWSPO started to get concerned about this. Wonder how many people are actually killed. So one of these got put in jail. So, okay, I don't know how long after she was put in jail, but 2 bombs were left on the Waterloo to Kingston line, with one being placed on the eastbound train and the other on the westbound train. One of the bombs were discovered before it exploded at someplace, so I guess they're not very good at this terrorism stuff. A lot of stuff seems to not work very well. Later in the day, as the Waterloo train pulled into Kingston, the third-class carriage exploded and caught fire. The rest of the carriages were full of passengers at the time, but they managed to escape without serious injury. They were trying to blow up. Like, there would have been women and children in there. No? The bombs have been packed with lumps of jagged metal, bullets, and scraps of lead. The London Underground was also targeted. On 2nd of May. A highly unstable nitroglycerin bomb was discovered on the platform at Piccadilly Circus Tube Station. I've been to a lot of these places in London. Okay, that didn't work. The cricket pavilion at Neville Ground and Royal Turnbridge Wells was destroyed in a suffragette arson attack. Okay, like there's just pages and pages of this shit. Targeting of houses, deaths and further injuries, 1914 attacks, aborted plots. Okay, and then I looked up another one about the suffrages, and they were saying, okay, it didn't say anything about this, and they said, yeah, in the end they decided to abandon their efforts for women's suffrage, which means the right to vote, and devote their energies to the World War One deal thing they had going there, and then they came across as heroes in that. Oh my God, this is so funny. So a little known fact about Canadian politics is that there's a really big deal about women not being allowed to vote. But in fact, women with money were allowed to vote before. Hang on. Let me think. Okay, in Canada at the time, I think that you had to have property to vote. If you didn't own property and pay taxes, you weren't allowed to vote. There's a certain sense to that. And so then they expanded the franchise to women with money, and that's how it actually worked. But there was a certain thing there. They said, well, okay, you're going to ask a man, usually, to go to war, and you're not going to allow him to vote. And so that's why men without money were allowed to vote before women were. And so a lot of women didn't at that time. They didn't want to vote because they thought that if they had the right to vote, that would mean they'd have to go to war. So I think the majority of women actually were against women voting. Okay, so we're 12 minutes in. They're still talking about Omicron on Christmas Day. Oh my God. Okay. Well, that was a lot of fun, wasn't it? Here we go. This is in Wikipedia: suffragette bombing and arson campaign. Wow. One of these crazy fuckers took a horsewhip to Winston Churchill. And we thought it was crazy now. Good God, eh? Good God, eh? Okay, we're good.